The desperate choice, Rosalind Torres, stood in the sterile hallway of Houston Methodist Hospital, clutching a piece of paper that felt heavier than lead in her trembling hands. The oncologist's words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. 15-year-old brother Jamie needed an experimental treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. $250,000. She might as well have been told he needed the moon. As a pediatric nurse, Rosalind had seen families face impossible choices before. She never imagined she would be one of them. Jamie was all she had left since their parents died in a car accident. 3 years ago, she had become his guardian, his protector, his everything. Now she was failing him in the most crucial moment of his life. The hospital's financial counselor had been kind but direct. Jamie had perhaps 6 months without the treatment. With it, his survival rate jumped to 70%. The numbers were cruel mathematics that reduced her brother's life too. Statistics and dollar signs. Rosalind walked through the hospital's corridors in a daze, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. She could sell everything she owned, but it wouldn't even cover 10% of the cost. She could take out loans, but her salary as a nurse would never qualify her for such an amount. Every door seemed to slam shut before she could even approach it. That evening, she sat in their small apartment in a modest neighborhood of Houston, watching Jamie sleep. He looked so young, so peaceful, unaware that his big sister was drowning. In desperation, the medical bills were already piling up on the kitchen table, creating a mountain of debt that seemed insurmountable. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Carmen, who worked as a paralegal at a prestigious law firm downtown. The message was brief but intriguing. "Call me. I might have something that could help with Jamie." An unusual proposal the next morning? Rosalind found herself in the gleaming offices of Henderson and Associates, feeling completely out of place. In her simple dress and worn shoes, Carmen had insisted she come immediately, promising that what she had to share could change everything. "You're going to think I've lost my mind," Carmen said, closing the conference room door behind them. "But I overheard something yesterday that made me think of your situation." Carmen explained that the firm represented several high-net-worth individuals, including some of the wealthiest families in Texas. One client had a very unusual request that had the senior partners scratching their heads. "There's this tech billionaire, Nathaniel Blake, you know? The guy who created those software systems that half the Fortune 500 companies use. He needs to get married within the next 3 months to meet the terms of his grandfather's will. If he doesn't, he loses control of his company and about $3 billion. Rosalind stared at her friend in confusion. "What does this have to do with me?" "He doesn't want a real wife. He wants a contract. Someone who will marry him, play the part for exactly 1 year, and then quietly divorce him. In exchange, he's willing to pay $500,000. The number hit Rosalind like a physical blow. $500,000 would not only cover Jamie's treatment, but also ensure his continued care and their financial security for years to come. "Carmen, this sounds crazy. Why would someone do this?" Carmen pulled out a file folder, because he's apparently had terrible luck with relationships. Every woman he's dated has either been after his money or tried to use him to advance their own career. He wants someone who has never moved in his social circles, someone who won't have hidden motives or connections to his business rivals, and he would choose a complete stranger. That's exactly what he wants, a stranger with a clean background. Someone professional, trustworthy, and most importantly, someone who needs the money badly enough to honor the contract without getting emotionally involved. Rosalind felt her heart racing. It sounded too good to be true, which usually meant it was. But the image of Jamie lying in that hospital bed kept flashing through her mind. What would I have to do? Carmen opened the file and began reading from a legal document. Live in his house for 1 year. Attend social functions as his wife when required. Maintain complete discretion about the arrangement. No romantic involvement, no media interviews. At the end of the year, you get an amicable divorce and walk away with the money. The meeting 3 days later, Rosalind found herself in the penthouse. Office of Blake Technologies, 60 floors above downtown Houston. The view was breathtaking, showcasing the sprawling city below. But her attention was entirely focused on the man sitting behind the massive desk. Nathaniel Blake was not what she had expected. The photos she had found online showed a polished businessman in expensive suits. But the man before her seemed more approachable. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he had been running his fingers through it. His green eyes were intelligent but guarded. And there was something about his expression that suggested he was as uncomfortable with this meeting as she was. "Miss Torres," he said, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm but brief. "Thank you for coming. I understand Carmen explained the general terms of what I'm looking for." "She did, Mr. Blake. Though I have to admit it sounds unconventional." A slight smile crossed his face. "That's one word for it. Please sit down. I'd like to explain my situation more fully." Nathaniel moved to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out at the city. "My grandfather built this company from nothing. He was a brilliant man, but also very traditional. When he wrote his will, he included a clause requiring me to be married by my 33rd birthday to inherit full control of the company." He turned back to face her. "I'm 32. My birthday is in 11 months. If I don't meet this requirement, the company passes to a board of trustees, many of whom would love nothing more than to sell it off piece by piece. Why not just find someone you actually want to marry?" The question seemed to hit a nerve. Nathaniel's expression darkened slightly, "Because I've learned that my wealth makes it impossible to know someone's true motivations. Every relationship I've had has ultimately been tainted by money, ambition, or social climbing. I prefer honesty, even if it's a business transaction." Rosalind appreciated his directness, even if it was coldly practical. "And what would you expect from me?" "Exactly what the contract outlines. You would move into my house, attend necessary social functions, and maintain the appearance of being my wife. In private, we would live essentially separate lives. I have no interest in a real marriage, Miss Torres. I simply need to meet the legal requirements." The conversation continued for another hour, with Nathaniel's lawyer explaining the contract terms in detail. The money would be held in escrow and released upon completion of the year-long agreement. There were clauses about confidentiality, behavior expectations, and even provisions for what would happen if either party wanted to end the arrangement early. "I need time to think about this," Rosalind finally said. Nathaniel nodded. "Of course. But I should mention that I've interviewed several other candidates. I'll need an answer by the end of the week." The decision that night, Rosalind sat with Jamie as he received his latest round of chemotherapy. The treatment he was currently on was helping, but the doctors had been clear that it was only buying time. Without the experimental treatment, they were fighting a losing battle. "Rosa," Jamie said weakly, using the nickname he had called her since he was little. "You look worried. More worried than usual, I mean." She forced a smile, just thinking about work stuff. Jamie studied her with the wisdom that serious illness sometimes brings to young people. "You know, you don't have to pretend with me, right? I know how bad things are. I hear the doctors talking, and I see those bills on the kitchen table." Rosalind felt tears threaten to spill over. "Jamie, don't worry about any of that. That's my job. But what if I could help somehow? What if there was a way for me to make this easier for you?" The innocence of his offer broke her heart. Here was a 15-year-old boy fighting for his life, worried about being a burden to his sister. In that moment, Rosalind knew what she had to do. "There might be an opportunity," she said carefully. "Something that could help us financially, but it would mean some big changes for both of us." She explained the situation in terms Jamie could understand, leaving out some of the stranger details, but being honest about what it would mean. He would have the best medical care available. They would live in a house where he could recover, in comfort. The financial stress that had been crushing them both would disappear. "It sounds too good to be true," Jamie said, echoing her own thoughts. "Maybe, but sometimes life surprises us." Jamie was quiet for a long moment. "Rosa, you've given up everything for me. If this could help both of us, and you think it's safe, then I trust you." 2 days later, Rosalind called the number on Nathaniel Blake's business card. The agreement the wedding took place in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with only the required witnesses present. Rosalind wore a simple navy dress she had bought for the occasion, while Nathaniel appeared in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. The ceremony was brief, and impersonal. They exchanged vows that were purely legal formalities, and when the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel's handshake wased only physical contact between them. "Mrs. Blake," he said formally, and the name sounded strange to her ears. "Mr. Blake," she replied, matching his tone. The lawyer handling their arrangement had prepared everything efficiently. Jamie's medical treatment would begin immediately, with all expenses covered. Rosalind's few possessions would be moved to Nathaniel's estate in River Oaks, one of Houston's most exclusive neighborhoods. As they left the courthouse, Nathaniel paused at his car, a sleek black sedan that looked like it belonged in a movie. "I want to be clear about our arrangement," he said. "This is a business relationship. We'll be polite and professional with each other, but I don't expect friendship or intimacy of any kind. You'll have your own wing of the house, and will maintain separate schedules, except when public appearances are required." Rosalind nodded. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Blake." "Nathaniel," he corrected. "In public, you should call me Nathaniel. We are married, after all." The ride to his house was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Rosalind stared out the window as they drove through increasingly upscale neighborhoods, wondering what she had gotten herself into. The new world Nathaniel's house was more like a small palace. Set behind iron gates and surrounded by perfectly manicured grounds, it was the kind of place Rosalind had only seen in magazines. The interior was even more intimidating, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. Mrs. Blake, a woman in her 50s, approached them as they entered. "I'm Patricia, the house manager. Mr. Blake has asked me to show you to your quarters." Rosalind followed Patricia through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past rooms that looked like they had never been used. Her quarters turned out to be a complete apartment within the larger house, with its own bedroom, sitting room, and bathroom that was larger than her old living room. "Mr. Blake asked me to let you know that Jamie will be staying in the guest suite next to yours once he's released from the hospital," Patricia explained. "We've made arrangements for a home health care setup if needed." The thoughtfulness of the gesture surprised Rosalind. In all their conversations, Nathaniel had been coldly businesslike, but ensuring Jamie's comfort showed a consideration she hadn't expected. "Dinner is served at 7, Patricia continued. "Mr. Blake typically eats in the dining room, but you're welcome to eat in your quarters if you prefer. Breakfast is available whenever you'd like it." That evening, Rosalind found herself facing her first real test of the arrangement. She had spent the afternoon settling into her new room, unpacking the few possessions she had brought with her. Now, dressed in one of her nicest dresses, she made her way to the dining room. Nathaniel was already seated at the head of a table that could easily accommodate 12 people. He had changed into a casual shirt and slacks, but still looked perfectly put together. He stood when she entered, a gesture that seemed automatic rather than warm. "Rosalind," he said, gesturing to the chair that had been set at the opposite end of the table. The distance between them felt symbolic of their entire arrangement. They were married, living in the same house, but might as well have been strangers sharing a hotel. Dinner was served by silent staff members, and the food was exceptional. But the conversation was stilted and formal, limited to neutral topics, like the weather and Rosalind's settling-in process. "How is Jamie doing?" Nathaniel asked as they finished the main course. "Better. The new treatment started today, and the doctors are optimistic." She paused, then added, "Thank you for arranging everything so quickly. It was part of our agreement." His response was matter of fact, reminding her that his consideration was purely contractual. But as Rosalind looked across the expanse of polished wood between them, she couldn't help wondering about the man behind the businessman's facade. As the weeks passed, they settled into a routine that was polite but distant. Nathaniel left early for his office and often worked late. Rosalind spent her days with Jamie, who was responding well to his treatment. And gradually exploring the vast house that was now supposedly her home, she learned that Nathaniel was brilliant, driven, and completely dedicated to his work. She also learned that he was profoundly lonely, though he would never admit it. The house was beautiful, but cold. It's filled with expensive objects, but lacking any sense of warmth or personality. Their first public appearance, As a married couple was at a charity gala for the Houston Symphony, Rosalind had spent days preparing, working with a stylist that Nathaniel had hired to ensure she looked the part of a tech, Leonier's wife. The emerald green gown was stunning. And when Nathaniel saw her that evening, she caught something in his expression that looked almost like appreciation before his usual controlled mask slipped back into place. "You look appropriate," he said, which she supposed was meant as a compliment. At the gala, Nathaniel was transformed. He was charming, articulate, and seemed to know everyone in the room. He introduced Rosalind as his wife with convincing warmth, his hand resting lightly on her back in gestures that appeared natural and affectionate. But the moment they returned home, the performance ended. He thanked her for her professionalism and disappeared into his study, leaving Rosalind alone with the strange realization that she had glimpsed a side of him that might be closer to his true self than the cold businessman she lived with. As she prepared for bed that night, Rosalind reflected on the surreal turn her life had taken. 3 months ago, she had been a struggling nurse, facing her brother's potential death sentence. Now she was married to one of the wealthiest men in America, living in luxury she had never dreamed of, but she was also lonelier than she had ever been in her life. The arrangement was working exactly as Nathaniel had designed it. They were polite strangers sharing a house, nothing more. She should have been satisfied with that. After all, Jamie was getting better. Their financial problems had vanished. She would walk away from this year significantly wealthier than she had ever imagined possible. So why did she find herself listening for Nathaniel's footsteps in the hallway late at night? Why did she notice the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his work? And why did she feel a growing curiosity about the man who had chosen to buy a wife rather than find love? The contract had been very clear about avoiding emotional involvement. But as Rosalind discovered, emotions don't always follow the terms of legal agreements. And sometimes the most carefully constructed walls begin to develop cracks, allowing light to seep through in ways that no one expects. The first crack 3 months into their arrangement, Rosalind had settled into the strange rhythm of being married to a stranger. She spent her mornings with Jamie, who was responding remarkably well to his treatment. His color had returned, his energy was improving, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about his progress. In the afternoons, she often found herself wandering the vast house, discovering rooms that seemed untouched for years. It was during one of these explorations that she stumbled upon Nathaniel's private study. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear him speaking on a video call with what sounded like international business partners. His voice carried a warmth and enthusiasm she had never heard during their formal dinners together. The education initiative in rural Kenya is exceeding all our projections, he was saying. We've connected over 50 schools to high-speed internet, and the impact on student performance has been remarkable. Rosalind paused, surprised. She had assumed Nathaniel's company only focused on profitable software solutions for corporations. She had no idea he was involved in humanitarian work. The goal was never just profit, Nathaniel continued. Technology should bridge gaps, not widen them. If we can give these kids access to the same educational resources as students in New York or London, we're not just changing their lives, we're changing their communities for generations. The passion in his voice was unmistakable. This was not the cold businessman who sat across from her at dinner each night. This was someone who genuinely cared about making a difference in the world. Rosalind quietly moved away from the door, but the conversation stayed with her. That evening at dinner, she found herself studying Nathaniel with new eyes. "How was your day?" she asked, breaking their usual pattern of minimal conversation. Nathaniel looked up from his meal, seemingly surprised by the question. "Fine. Productive. Meetings. The usual. Anything particularly interesting?" He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Why do you ask? Just making conversation. We live in the same house." It seems strange that we know so little about each other's daily lives. Nathaniel set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "Our arrangement doesn't require personal familiarity, Rosalind." The use of her full name stung. During their public appearances, he called her Rosa, a shortened version that somehow felt more intimate. But in private, he maintained the formal distance of their contract. I'm aware of what our arrangement requires, she replied. But it doesn't prohibit normal human interaction either. Something flickered across Nathaniel's face, an emotion too quick to identify. You're right, I apologize. My day was actually quite positive. We finalized funding for several new educational programs in developing countries. That sounds meaningful. It is. He seemed to consider his words carefully. Technology has given me opportunities I never dreamed of growing up. It seems important to extend those opportunities to others. It was the most personal thing he had shared with her since their wedding day. Rosalind felt a small spark of connection, the first genuine moment between them. What were your dreams growing up? She asked softly. Nathaniel's expression shuddered again, the walls coming back up. That's not relevant to our current situation. The moment was gone, but it had existed. For just a few seconds, Rosalind had glimpsed the real person behind. The carefully controlled exterior. The storm, the first real test of their relationship, came on a Thursday evening in late October. Rosalind had spent the day at the hospital with Jamie, who was undergoing a particularly difficult round of treatment. The new therapy was working, but the side effects were brutal. She had held his hand while he threw up repeatedly, wiped his fevered brow, and tried to stay strong while watching her little brother suffer. She arrived home exhausted, both physically and emotionally drained. All she wanted was to take a hot shower and collapse into bed. But Patricia intercepted her at the door with news that made her stomach drop. Mrs. Blake, there are some gentlemen here to see you. They're waiting in Mr. Blake's study. Rosalind's first thought was that something had happened to Jamie after she left the hospital. But as she hurried toward the study, she heard unfamiliar voices mixed with Nathaniel's tense tone. She knocked and entered to find Nathaniel facing two men in expensive suits. Their faces were serious, and the atmosphere in the room was electric. With tension. Ah, Mrs. Blake, one of the men said, rising from his chair. I'm David Chen, and this is Robert Williams. We're from the firm that handles Mr. Blake's family trust. Rosalind looked between the men and Nathaniel, whose jaw was set in a hard line. Is everything all right? That depends, Chen said smoothly. We've received some concerning information about the legitimacy of your marriage. The words hit Rosalind like a physical blow. What kind of information? Williams opened a briefcase and withdrew a folder. We have evidence suggesting that this marriage may be a contractual arrangement designed to circumvent the terms of the Blake family trust. Rosalind's heart began to race. What evidence? Financial records showing a significant payment made to your account immediately following your marriage. Medical records indicating your brother's treatment began the same day you signed your marriage certificate. Phone records of conversations between you and Carmen Rodriguez discussing the arrangement. The room felt like it was spinning. It had been so careful, but somehow their secret was out. Gentleman, Nathaniel said, his voice deadly calm. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? Chen asked. Because if this marriage is fraudulent, Mr. Blake forfeits all rights to the family trust and company control. Rosalind looked at Nathaniel, seeing her own panic reflected in his eyes. Everything they had worked for, everything Jamie needed, was crumbling around them. The marriage is legal, Nathaniel said firmly. We have the certificate to prove it. Legal, yes, Williams replied. But legitimate, that's another matter entirely. Chen stood and walked to the window, his back to them. Here's what's going to happen. We're launching a full investigation into this marriage. If we find evidence of fraud, Mr. Blake will lose everything. If we find that this is a genuine relationship between two people who fell in love and decided to marry, then all is well. He turned back to face them. You have 2 weeks to convince us that this marriage is real. We'll be watching, Mr. Blake. We'll be interviewing friends, family, and associates. We'll be looking at your behavior, your living arrangements, your interactions with each other. After the lawyers left, Nathaniel and Rosalind stood in the study, the silence heavy between them. How did they find out? Rosalind whispered. I don't. No, but it doesn't matter now. What matters is figuring out how to salvage this situation. Rosalind sank into a chair, the full weight of the disaster settling on her shoulders. If they prove the marriage is fake, what happens to Jamie's treatment? Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. Jamie's treatment continues regardless. I made that promise, and I keep my promises. Yes. But you'll lose your company, yes? It's a simple admission hung in the air between them. Nathaniel had worked his entire life to build his company, and now it was in jeopardy because of their arrangement. I'm sorry, Rosalind said. This is my fault. Should never have agreed to this. The decision was mutual, Rosalind. We both knew the risks. But as they stood there in the aftermath of the lawyer's visit, both of them knew that their carefully constructed arrangement had just become something much more complicated. To save Nathaniel's company and protect their secret, they would have to do something neither of them had bargained for. They would have to act like they were truly in love, learning to live together the next morning. Nathaniel appeared at Rosalind's door with 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression. We need to talk about how we're going to handle this, he said. Settling into the chair across from her small sitting area, Rosalind accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that he had somehow remembered she liked it with cream and no sugar. It was a small detail, but it suggested he had been paying more attention than she realized. What do you think they're looking for? She asked, evidence that we share a genuine emotional connection, that we know each other well enough to be convincing as a married couple, that we behave like people who chose to be together out of love rather than convenience. Rosalind considered this. We barely know each other beyond the basics. Means we need to learn quickly. Nathaniel pulled out a notepad. Tell me about your childhood. Your fears, your dreams, your favorite memories. Everything a husband would know about his wife. For the next 2 hours, they conducted what felt like the most intense job interview of Rosalind's life. She learned that Nathaniel had grown up, lonely, despite his wealth, that his parents had died when he was in college, leaving him to navigate the business world alone. She learned that he was afraid of failure not because of the money, but because he felt responsible for the thousands of people employed by his company. She learned that he played piano when he couldn't sleep, that he had a scar on his left hand from trying to fix a computer as a child, and that he secretly funded college scholarships for underprivileged students, but never publicized it, because he didn't want the recognition. In return, she shared her own stories. The terror of becoming Jamie's guardian at 25. The pride she felt watching her patients recover. Her dream of one day opening a clinic in underserved communities, the way she still missed their parents every single day. We need to practice being affectionate, Nathaniel said as their conversation wound down. If investigators are watching, they'll expect to see normal married couple behavior. The suggestion made Rosalind's cheeks flush. What kind of affection? Holding casual touches. It's the way couples interact when they're comfortable with each other. He stood and extended his hand to her. May I? Rosalind placed her hand in his, surprised by how warm his palm was against hers. His fingers were long and elegant, with calluses she hadn't expected from computer use and piano playing. When we're in public, this should feel natural, he said, his thumb gently brushing across her knuckles. Not forced or awkward. The touch sent an unexpected shiver through Rosalind. She looked up to find Nathaniel watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Like this? She asked, stepping closer and placing her free hand on his chest. Nathaniel's eyes darkened. Yes, like that. They stood there for a moment, practicing intimacy that wasn't quite fake, but wasn't quite real either. Rosalind could feel Nathaniel's heart beating under her palm, could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. We should probably practice other things too, she said softly. What other things? Kissing. If we're supposed to be in love, people will expect to see us kiss. Nathaniel's hand tightened slightly on hers. You sure you're comfortable with that? Instead of answering, Rosalind rose onto her toes and pressed her lips gently against his. It was meant to be a brief, practical kiss. Just enough to test their chemistry for the sake of their performance. But the moment their lips met, something shifted. Nathaniel's free hand came up to cup her cheek, and the kiss deepened into something that felt nothing like a performance. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. That should be convincing, Rosalind whispered. Yes, Nathaniel agreed, but his voice was hoarse. Very convincing. The pretense begins over the following days. Nathaniel and Rosalind. threw themselves into becoming a convincing married couple. They started having breakfast together each morning, sharing stories and learning each other's preferences. Nathaniel began coming home earlier from work, and they would spend evenings together, sometimes watching movies or just talking. The physical affection came easier than either of them expected. Nathaniel would place his hand on the small of Rosalind's. Back when they walked together, she would reach over to straighten his tie or brush an imaginary speck from his jacket. They held hands while watching television, and Rosalind found herself unconsciously leaning into his warmth. But it was the small intimacies that surprised them both. The way Nathaniel started bringing Rosalind coffee each morning without being asked. How Rosalind began leaving little notes in his briefcase, wishing him luck with important meetings. The comfortable silences that developed between them. Jamie noticed the changes immediately. "You two seem different," he observed one evening when Nathaniel joined them for dinner in the informal dining room, more like actual married people. Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you look at each other differently now. Before you were like polite strangers. Now you actually seem to like each other." Nathaniel and Rosalind exchanged glances across the table. "Marriage is an adjustment," Nathaniel said carefully. "We're still learning how to be married to each other." Jamie grinned. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. It's nice seeing Rosa happy." Later that night, as they said goodnight in the hallway outside their respective rooms, Nathaniel paused. "Jamie's right, you know. You do seem happier lately." "So, do you?" Rosalind replied, more relaxed. They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged with an awareness that hadn't existed a week ago. "Good night, Rosa," Nathaniel said softly, using the shortened version of her name that had become natural between them. "Good night, Nathaniel." But as Rosalind lay in bed that night, she found herself wondering when their performance had started feeling so real. When had Nathaniel's touch begun to make her heart race? When had she started looking forward to their morning conversations and evening walks through the garden? The contract had been very clear about avoiding emotional involvement. But the line between pretending to be in love and actually falling in love was proving to be dangerously thin, and Rosalind was beginning to suspect that she had already crossed it. The investigation intensifies. The investigators were thorough and relentless. They interviewed Carmen, who stuck to the story that Rosalind and Nathaniel had met through mutual friends and fallen in love quickly. They spoke with Nathaniel's business associates, who confirmed that his behavior had changed since the marriage, that he seemed happier and more balanced. But they also dug deeper. They questioned hospital staff about the timing of Jamie's treatment. They reviewed financial records with microscopic attention to detail. They even hired a private investigator to follow Nathaniel and Rosalind during their daily activities. The constant scrutiny was exhausting. Every public interaction had to be perfect. Every gesture had to convey authentic emotion. The pressure was building, and both Nathaniel and Rosalind could feel the strain. It was during this intense period that the walls between them finally came down completely. Rosalind had spent a particularly difficult day with Jamie, whose treatment was entering a crucial phase. The doctors were optimistic, but the uncertainty was wearing on all of them. She returned home emotionally drained and found Nathaniel waiting for her in the living room. "How is he?" Nathaniel asked, rising from his chair, scared. "In pain, trying to be brave for my sake." Rosalind's voice cracked. "I hate watching him suffer." Without thinking, Nathaniel crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. It wasn't calculated or performed for any audience. It was simply human comfort offered at a moment when it was desperately needed. Rosalind collapsed against his chest. Finally allowing herself to feel the fear she had been holding back, Nathaniel held her while she cried, his hand gently stroking her hair. "He's going to be okay," Nathaniel said softly. "Treatment is working. The doctors are confident. But what if it's not enough? What if I lose him too? You won't? And even if the worst happened, which it won't, you wouldn't be alone. You have me." The simple declaration stopped Rosalind's tears. She pulled back to look at Nathaniel's face, searching for any sign that it was just another part of their performance, but what she saw in his eyes was completely genuine. Concern, tenderness, and something deeper that made her heart skip. "Do I?" she whispered. "Do I really have you?" Nathaniel's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb wiping away her tears. Rosa, what we started as a business arrangement has become something else entirely. At least it has for me. What has it become? Instead of answering with words, Nathaniel leaned down and kissed her. This kiss was different from their practice sessions. It was soft, sweet, and full of emotion that neither of them could deny anymore. When they broke apart, both of them knew that everything had changed. The careful boundaries they had maintained were gone. The emotional walls they had built were crumbling. "I never expected this," Rosalind whispered against his lips. "Neither did I. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just for show." They held each other in the quiet of the living room, both of them finally admitting what had been building between them for weeks. The contract marriage had become something real, something precious, something worth fighting for. But as they stood there in each other's arms, neither of them knew that their moment of honesty was about to be tested in ways they never could have imagined. The truth comes out. The call came at 6 in the morning, jarring both Nathaniel and Rosalind from sleep. They had fallen asleep in the living room, wrapped in each other's arms on the sofa, finally allowing themselves the intimacy they had been fighting against for months. Nathaniel answered, his phone with a groggy voice that quickly sharpened to full alertness. "What do you mean they have recordings?" he said, sitting up abruptly. Rosalind immediately became alert, sensing the danger in his tone. "No, don't say anything else over the phone. I'll be there in an hour." He ended the call and turned to Rosalind, his face pale. "That was my lawyer. The investigators have recordings of our initial conversations about the contract arrangement. Someone has been feeding them information from the beginning." Rosalind felt the world tilt beneath her. "How is that possible?" "I don't know, but they're demanding a meeting this morning. They say they have enough evidence to prove the marriage was fraudulent from the start." Oh. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic phone calls and emergency meetings. Nathaniel's legal team scrambled to understand how their private conversations had been recorded and who had access to such sensitive information. The answer, when it came, was devastating. Carmen had been working with the investigators from the beginning. The paralegal who had introduced Rosalind to the arrangement had been paid by David Chen's firm to set the entire thing up. They had wanted to create a provable case of marriage fraud to remove Nathaniel from his position and install their own candidate as CEO. "She was never my friend," Rosalind said numbly, as they sat in Nathaniel's lawyer's office. "The whole thing was a setup from the beginning." "Not the whole thing," Nathaniel said firmly. "What happened between us was real. What we feel for each other is real, but the legal reality was inescapable." With recorded evidence of their initial contract negotiations, there was no way to deny that the marriage had begun as a business arrangement. "You have two options," Nathaniel's lead attorney explained. "You can fight this in court, which will be expensive, public, and likely unsuccessful given the evidence against you. Or you can negotiate a settlement that allows you to step down gracefully while protecting your personal assets." "What about the company?" "The company would pass to the trust, as stipulated in your grandfather's will." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "And if I fight and lose, you could face criminal charges for fraud. Financial penalties would be severe. Rosa could be charged as a co-conspirator." The mention of criminal charges made Rosalind's blood run cold. She thought of Jamie, finally healthy and happy, and the possibility that she might face prison time. "I won't let Rosa be charged with anything," Nathaniel said immediately. "This was my idea, my company, my problem." "Nathaniel, no," Rosalind protested. "We're in this together." But even as she said it, she could see him withdrawing, putting his walls back up to protect her from the consequences of their failed arrangement. Sacrificed that evening, they sat in Nathaniel's study, surrounded by legal documents and the wreckage of their carefully constructed plan. The investigators had given them 24 hours to decide how to proceed. "I've made my decision," Nathaniel said quietly, "going to step down voluntarily. I'll make a statement saying that I entered into a marriage arrangement that violated the spirit of my grandfather's will, and I'll transfer control of the company to the trust. What about you? What happens to you, I'll be fine. I have enough personal assets to start over if I want to." The important thing is that you and Jamie are protected. Rosalind stared at him in disbelief. You're giving up everything you've worked for? The company means everything to you. It meant everything to me, Nathaniel corrected, before I knew what it felt like to have something worth giving it up for. The simple statement hit Rosalind like a physical blow. Nathaniel, you can't sacrifice your life's work for me. I'm not sacrificing it for you, Rosa. I'm choosing you over it. There's a difference. But the humanitarian projects, the scholarships, all the good you do through the company, I can do good in other ways. I can't replace what we have. Rosalind felt tears burning her eyes. The man who had started as a cold businessman buying a contract wife was willing to give up everything for her. The irony was heartbreaking. There has to be another way, she said desperately. There is. Both of them turned toward the door where Jamie stood, looking older than his 15 years. Jamie, you should be resting, Rosalind begged. I heard everything, he said, walking into the room. The phone calls, the meetings, all of it. He looked between his sister and Nathaniel with a maturity that came from facing his own mortality. There is another way, but you're both too noble to see it. What do you mean? Nathaniel asked. You tell them the truth? All of it. Rosalind shook her head. Jamie, we tried that. The evidence is too clear. Not that truth. The real truth. Jamie sat down across from them. Yes. You started with a contract. Yes, it was a business arrangement. But somewhere along the way, it became real. You fell in love. The question is, when? Nathaniel and Rosalind looked at each other, understanding beginning to dawn. Think about it, Jamie continued. When did your feelings change? When did it stop being an act? If you can prove that you genuinely fell in love before the investigation started, then the marriage became real. Even if it didn't start that way. It was a slim hope, but it was something. Over the next several hours, Nathaniel and Rosalind worked with their legal team to document the evolution of their relationship. They gathered evidence of when their behavior had changed, when their interactions had become genuine rather than performed. Patricia, the house manager, provided testimony about how their relationship had evolved. She described watching them gradually become more comfortable with each other, how their body language had shifted from formal to intimate. The staff at the hospital where Jamie was being treated confirmed that Nathaniel had begun accompanying Rosalind to appointments, that he had shown genuine concern for Jamie's welfare beyond what any contract would require. Even their public appearances told a story. Early photos showed them standing apart, smiling for cameras, but maintaining careful distance. Later images captured unconscious intimacy, Nathaniel's hand resting naturally on Rosalind's back, her fingers intertwined. With his genuine laughter and shared glances that couldn't be staged, the final confrontation, the meeting with the investigators, took place in a downtown conference room, with lawyers for both sides present. David Chen and Robert Williams sat across from Nathaniel and Rosalind, confident in their evidence of fraud. Mr. Blake, Chen began, we've recorded conversations proving that you entered into a contractual marriage arrangement specifically to circumvent your grandfather's will. Do you deny this? No, Nathaniel said calmly. I don't deny that the marriage began as a business arrangement. Chen smiled triumphantly. Then you admit to marriage fraud. I admit that the marriage began as a contract, but it didn't remain. That way, Rosalind's lawyer, a sharp woman named Margaret Foster, took over. Gentlemen, while it's true that Mr. Blake and Mrs. Blake initially entered into their marriage for practical reasons, the evidence clearly shows that their relationship evolved into a genuine emotional partnership. She spread photographs across the table. These images, taken by your own investigators, show the progression of their relationship. Notice how their body language changes over time, how their interactions become more natural and intimate. Williams frowned at the photos. These could easily be staged. Could they? Foster opened another folder. Your medical records from Jamie Torres's treatment. Note that Mr. Blake began attending appointments with Mrs. Blake in early December. Well, before your investigation began, the hospital staff report that he showed genuine emotional investment in the boy's welfare. She placed more documents on the table. Bank records showing that Mr. Blake increased his charitable giving significantly after his marriage, specifically Two causes that Mrs. Blake cared about: a homeless shelter where she used to volunteer, a scholarship fund for nursing students. Chen shifted uncomfortably. Financial gestures don't prove emotional connection, perhaps not individually, Foster agreed. But combined with testimony from household staff, friends, and associates, they paint a clear picture of two people who fell in love despite their initial arrangement. She paused for effect. The question isn't whether this marriage began as a business arrangement. The question is whether it became real, and the evidence overwhelmingly shows that it did. Nathaniel leaned forward. Gentlemen, I won't insult your intelligence by claiming this marriage was love at first sight. It wasn't. Rosa needed money to save her brother's life, and I needed a wife to meet my grandfather's requirements. But what happened between us after that was completely unexpected. He reached over and took Rosalind's hand. I fell in love with my wife. Genuinely, completely, unexpectedly. If that disqualifies me from my inheritance, then so be it. Claim that our marriage is fraudulent, when what we feel for each other is the most real thing in my life. Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. The law recognizes that marriages can begin for practical reasons and develop into genuine partnerships. Foster continued. Arranged marriages, marriages of convenience that become love matches. The spirit of your grandfather's will was that you should be a married man, presumably because he believed marriage would give you stability and perspective. By that measure, the requirement has been more than fulfilled. The room fell silent as the investigators considered the evidence and arguments presented. Finally, Chen spoke. We'll need time to review all of this material and consult with the other trustees. Of course, Foster replied. But I think you'll find that my clients have satisfied both the letter and the spirit of the will's requirements. The new beginning, the trustees' decision, came a week later. By a narrow vote, they determined that while the marriage had begun as a contractual arrangement, the evidence of genuine emotional development was sufficient to satisfy the will's requirements. Nathaniel would retain control of his company, but with increased oversight and transparency requirements. The victory felt hollow to Rosalind. Yes, they had won, but the process had exposed the fragile foundation their relationship was built on. The man she had fallen in love with had been willing to sacrifice everything for her, but would they ever be able to move past the artificial beginning of their marriage? That evening, they sat on the terrace of their home, watching the sunset over Houston's skyline. Jamie was inside, finally healthy and strong, preparing for his return to school. So what happens now? Rosalind asked. Now we decide what we want our marriage to be going forward, Nathaniel replied. We can honor the original contract and divorce quietly at the end of the year. Or we can try to build something real on the foundation of what we've discovered about each other. What do you want, Nathaniel? Turned to face her fully. I want to court you properly. Want to take you on real dates, learn your favorite flowers, meet your friends from before all this started. I want us to choose each other every day, not because of a contract or legal requirements, but because we want to be together. You want to start over? I want to start right. We fell in love backwards, Rosa. We learned to care about each other while pretending to be married. Now, I want to see what it's like to build a relationship based on choice rather than necessity. Rosalind considered this. The man beside her was no longer the cold businessman she had agreed to marry. He was someone who had proven his devotion, in the most dramatic way possible, willing to sacrifice everything he had worked for rather than see her hurt. All right, she said finally, but I have some conditions. Name them. First, no more secrets between us. No more walls or careful distances. If we're going to do this, we do it honestly. Agreed. Second, Jamie comes with us. It's part of my life. And if you want me, you get him too. Nathaniel smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. That boy has more wisdom than most adults. I know. Third, I want to go back to work. Part-time at least. I need to feel useful, to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Blake. Of course, you should do work that fulfills you. Rosalind took a deep breath. Oh. And fourth, I want you to ask me to marry you. Properly this time. Not because you need a wife or I need money, but because we choose each other. Nathaniel's eyes lit up with understanding. Without hesitation, he slid off his chair and onto one knee beside her chair. "Rosalind Torres Blake," he said, taking her hand, "I fell in love with you while pretending to be your husband. I've learned that you're brave enough to sacrifice yourself for someone you love, strong enough to face impossible odds without breaking, and kind enough to see the good. In a man who thought he had none left." He paused, his voice growing hoarse with emotion. "I love your laugh and your stubbornness and the way you make me want to be better than I am. I love that you cry during sad movies and that you remember everyone's birthday and that you see our arrangement as taking care of people as a calling, not just a job." Rosalind felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't offer you a fairy tale romance, Rosa. What I can offer you is a man who will choose you every single day for the rest of his life. A partner who will stand beside you through everything life brings. A love that started as pretense but became the most real thing I've ever known." He looked into her eyes. "Will you marry me? Not because you have to, not because you need to, but because you want to spend your life with me?" "Yes," Rosalind whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course yes."